You've been diligently saving, you've saved up a healthy down payment to buy your dream home, you've met with your real estate agent, you've met with a lender. Now there's talk about the closing costs. Well, what are those? And who pays for them? Stick around, this is the video for you. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It is Central Maine's Realtor Nick Isgro with eXp Realty. And as I just stated at the beginning, today I want to get into something that I get asked about quite often, and particularly either with first-time home buyers or just folks who have been out of the market for a long time, people who haven't done it in a while, you know, whether you're upsizing, whether you're downsizing, and that is, what are the closing costs on the loan? What is it? What's cooked into that? What are the fees that you're paying? How much is it going to cost? And who's going to pay for that when you get to the end? Before I get into that, I do want to welcome you here to the channel. If you've never been here before, we cover all things real estate here in the state of Maine, but particularly more so right here in the Central Maine market. If that is of interest to you or adds value to your process in the buying or selling of homes, or maybe you just are interested in real estate here in Maine, do me a favor, go ahead and hit the like button on this video, hit subscribe, knock that little alarm bell, and you'll be notified every time we put out new content. All right, so in general, what are closing costs? Closing costs are going to be a combination of different fees and charges that get added up during the loan processing time, right up to the day of closing. They get lumped in, and it's an amount that you pay above and beyond the down payment. And this is a surprise to a lot of people. A lot of people, especially if they're first-time home buyers, might have done their diligence in saving up for the down payment, and then they might have a little sticker shock when they speak to the lender about what those closing costs are. So first and foremost, how much are the closing costs? Well, you can expect on average somewhere between 3 and 6% of the closing price. It's going to be somewhere in there. And as I go through these, you're going to see that there are a lot of variables that are baked into this cake, which make it between that amount. And it's not always going to be exact, but this is a good estimate. So just to give you an example, you know, if you buy a home that's $200,000, you should expect on average, the closing cost would be somewhere between $6,000 and $12,000. Now, $12,000 definitely on the high end for a $200,000 home, but it is possible. It's not uncommon to see $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 on an average basis in the market right now. So let's, without any further ado, dig right in, talk about what those fees are, talk about what those costs are, and then give you a couple of tips and hints at the end of this video about how you might try your best during the process to reduce some of those costs. First and foremost on the closing costs is going to be your loan origination fees. Now, loan origination fees are going to average somewhere between 0.5% of the loan up to about 1% of the total loan that you're taking on the home that you're purchasing. So what are loan underwriting fees? Well, remember, the bank has a duty to make sure that you have the not only the willingness, but the ability to repay. So as they're checking your credit, they're reading your financial statements, they're looking at your bank statements that you've given to them, and they're going through that process of making sure that this loan is sound and good for the bank as well as for you. They have to pay somebody to do all that work. So the loan origination fees basically are 0.5% to 1% of the loan, and it's to pay that person who's at the bank being paid specifically to underwrite your loan. Next would be appraisal and survey fees. So the appraisal is something that by and large you're probably always going to have if you're taking out a loan, unless there was a recent appraisal done, or sometimes I know certain local banks, depending on how much of a down payment you are putting down, will not require an appraisal. That is the exception, not the rule. The rule would be, in general, if you're taking out a loan here in Central Maine on the home purchase, you're going to have an appraisal. So this could be anywhere between, you know, several $100s and $1,000. I will say, I think on average, you're going to see somewhere between $500 and $700 for that appraisal fee. It might be a little bit more, it might be a little bit less, probably not less than that range I just quoted, but you know, there's always the exception. I never like to speak in absolutes, but count on $500 to $700 roughly for that appraisal fee. Survey fees, that would be if you needed a survey for some reason on the property, and that would have a huge wide range of variables that I'm not going to get into now, because it's really the exception that you would need a survey when you're buying the home. Typically, you know, everything's going to go through the underwriting process, going through the title transfer. The title attorney or the title company will, you know, go through really just looking at the deeds, not needing a survey to go back out unless there's some kind of outside issue. Next is title insurance. Title insurance is an insurance policy that I believe in strongly. I think everybody should get is an insurance policy that makes sure that that title can be legally transferred from one party to the next, that there's a strong chain of title, and it really protects both the lender as well as you, the borrower. An example of this would be, let's say you buy the home, you've gone through this process, well, somebody comes and says, hey, 5 generations ago, my family had an unfair, practice. There was something wrong with the title chain, so it couldn't possibly have legally transferred down to you. This is an insurance policy that typically have very high limits to protect you, to protect your investment against any kind of strange or maybe not so strange adverse claim against the title once you own it. You want to make sure that that's something that has that legal ability to be transferred over to you. And that's why when they do the title process, by the way, they do go back, typically as much as they can, oftentimes to the source deed of that property to make sure that there's a clean chain of title from one person to the next, to the next, to the next, until it gets down to you. Next up for closing costs is typically going to be your homeowner's insurance policy. Now, a lot of times, obviously, once you are in the home and you're working with your insurance company, you can get your homeowner's insurance covered from month to month. You can make those monthly payments. But oftentimes, if you're taking out a loan, the majority of the time, you're going to pay that first year's homeowner policy right up front. Make sure you're covered for that entire first year of the loan. It's going to be included in the closing cost. What would that cost be? Obviously, it depends from house to house. I would expect on your average sale, $200,000 to $400,000, maybe somewhere between $600 and $1,000 on an annual basis, depending on what your insurance policy is. Tons of variable factors here. How close are you to a full-time fire department? Do you have a fire hydrant out front? What kind of dog do you have potentially if you have a larger, more aggressive breed of dog? There's just a lot of things that go into this. So I am not an insurance professional, so I'm not going to delve into that now. If you need a recommendation, by the way, for an insurance professional here in Central Maine, drop me a comment, shoot me a note. I would be happy to help you and connect you with some really wonderful professionals that I work with on a regular basis, including for my own personal insurance right here in Central Maine. But homeowners insurance, count on that being paid right up front as part of your closing costs. Private mortgage insurance. Now, this is a cost that's not going to be paid by everybody. So if you have your standard 20% down payment, this is not something that's going to apply for you. But if you are using a more conventional loan product, maybe it's not an FHA loan, but you are taking out, a 3% down, 5% down, 10% down payment type of loan, you're gonna have, without that 20% equity, private mortgage insurance. So you have private mortgage insurance as an insurance policy that you pay every month. It's there to cover the bank's collateral because they're taking quite a risk. All the leverage is really on the bank, it's not on you. And when your home gets to that 20% equity, so as you make those payments, you get to the 20% equity, that's a cost that's going to drop off. But on the front end, especially at closing, you're going to start paying that private mortgage insurance for that first year. Mortgage points is something that would come up during closing costs. This is honestly not something I've seen a lot of in the last few years because a mortgage point would be something you're paying directly to the lender, points on the loan, directly to the lender in order to get yourself a lower rate for the remaining span of the loan. Well, obviously we've had historically low interest rates. That's not something we've seen a ton of. Now that rates have gone back up a little bit, maybe we'll see a little bit more of that this year. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Property taxes. As you know, here in Maine, we do pay property tax that is run by each municipality. An interesting thing here in Maine is that every municipality has a somewhat different way of handling the property tax, different due dates on the taxes. So things that come in during the property tax, now one, you're probably going to pay 6 months in advance on that property tax to get you caught up, and then maybe you're escrowing those taxes or maybe you're paying them on your own, but at least the bank knows that those taxes are paid up front as you close on the loan. And there may also be a little bit of allocation of costs. Maybe if somebody overpaid on the taxes, if that seller has overpaid, depending on the closing date of your loan, you might pay a little bit more to them out of the loan closing. They get a little bit of money back or credit for that. If they are underpaid up to that, you might see that credit because they have to actually have that taken out as a credit to you at closing. So those are some things that can happen at closing, but for you specifically, just know you're going to pay about 6 months in advance on the property tax. All right, escrow fees and attorney's fees. This is going to range somewhere between 1% and 2% of your loan. This is that closing agent. Oftentimes here in Maine, it's an attorney. If you had any specific title issues going through, oftentimes a title attorney had to look through that to clear that up. I've seen that happen quite a bit. But that agent that really guided you from point A to point B, whoever that closing agent was that went through that title chain, ensured that the title was clean, probably set up your title insurance, that person's going to get paid for their work too, and that's going to be part of the closing costs. After this is going to be really a lot of any smaller miscellaneous outstanding fees. You know, if there was any setup fee for your water or for your sewer, if there were any outstanding utilities or things like that that needed to get prorated at closing, all of that stuff is going to happen at closing. Maybe the oil in the tank, sometimes you're going to pay for the oil that's remaining in the tank at the house. If that was part of your purchase and sale agreement, that would come into play as part of the closing costs. But that's really it, kind of A to Z. What are the closing costs? About how much are they? And what is included in that? And you can see it's a pretty comprehensive list of costs. Sometimes it's like, oh man, there's this huge cost you've got to pay at closing. What is it even for? Well, there were a lot of people involved in making that loan happen to get you into that home, whether it's the bank, the escrow folks, the title, you have your taxes that are due. All of that is factored in and comes up. And that's why, by the way, you can see that it would be a variable fee. I can't just tell you it's X amount. No lender could say, really right up until the end, it's going to be this amount. You can get an estimate of what that amount will be. And we'll get into that in a second, but you'll never hit it exact until all of those costs are final and you are headed towards the closing table. All right, as promised at the beginning of the video, a couple of ways that you could maybe try to whittle down that cost. The first one's gonna be the easiest thing you could do, and that's on the front end. That's just compare different lenders. You know, one of the things I often recommend is checking with various lenders on the front end anyway. You wanna get the best rate, the best cost, the overall total cost of that loan. That includes some of these closing costs. Ask, what are your standard closing costs? What are your loan origination fees? What do they look like? And you can get that from various lenders. Sometimes you might be able to negotiate a little bit if you have one lender versus another. Not saying always, a lot of these are probably going to be inflexible, so don't quote me on that. But it's a way that you can at least determine up front some of those fees and say, hey, I'm going to shop maybe the lowest one. But if you're shopping the lowest fees for closing, just make sure you're asking for the total cost of that loan, because obviously other things play in there. You'll want to look at the interest rate and things like that, because it's all going to factor in to what is the total cost of the loan, and every lender you work with will really be able to give you that loan estimate on the front end. Next way to lower those closing costs, ask the seller to contribute. This is something that, in a market that was crazy like last spring was really unheard of. There were no sellers that were going to contribute to closing costs because they just didn't have to negotiate that. Would not have been in their best interest, especially if they have, 10 to 20 offers in front of them. Most of them probably didn't have the closing costs factored in. One thing that we have seen with the market shift over the last 6 to 9 months as we're headed into this spring is, yes, it's still competitive. Yes, it's still a seller's market, but sellers are negotiating a little bit. And if you're the only offer on the table, there is a really good chance that they might be willing to contribute to some of those closing costs as part of that total negotiation. The last thing you want to do is explore maybe any rebates or incentives, whether it's from the bank or a specific loan program. There might be something for first-time buyers or maybe long-time out-of-the-market buyers out there trying to incentivize you to get into that, or maybe they're just trying to have a big loan push. Remember, if the real estate market and the real estate sales have slowed, well, I can tell you the mortgage loans have slowed as well. So you might find some incentive program depending on the banks you're looking at in order to get those costs lowered a little bit. All right, I know that was a little bit of a longer video, but I really wanted a comprehensive kind of discussion around what are the closing costs, because it is something that remains a mystery to a lot of people. Even when you get that estimate, it's hard to kind of take it all in at the time. You're just sitting there maybe with the lender. And for us on the real estate side, it's not always the easiest thing to just kind of whip out and explain. So I wanted to get this out there. I hope you found it useful. If you've been through this process, maybe you have questions about the process, go ahead, drop a comment below. Would love to hear from you there. Answer any questions that you might have. Of course, if you're looking for an agent in the market right now and you're looking for somebody to work with, maybe you just need a real estate professional to run some questions by, happy to help you anytime. All of my contact information is linked below in the post on this video. Of course, as always, I thank each and every one of you for sticking around to the end of this video, and until the next one, I'll see you next time.